You probably think the chicken you're buying is safe, but new evidence shows it might be putting you and your family at risk without you ever realizing it. Behind the bright supermarket lights, some of the biggest UK and US retailers are selling poultry that experts warn against products linked to contamination, weak inspections, and supply chain shortcuts hidden from the public. These patterns aren't accidents. They show up again and again in independent tests, government reports, and whistleblower statements from workers who've seen what really happens behind closed doors. What most people don't know is how this system actually works. America and Britain's poultry plants are built for speed, not safety. Hundreds of birds rush past overwhelmed inspectors every minute, leaving dangerous bacteria to slip through unnoticed. And when that contaminated chicken reaches your kitchen, the consequences can be far worse than a simple stomach bug. We're talking infections that hospitalize healthy people, long-term digestive issues, and rare complications that can change a life forever. Stay with me because in the next few minutes, you'll know exactly which supermarkets to avoid, and why your next grocery trip may look very different. Number 1. Walmart, the retail giant's dark secret. This retail giant consistently appears at the top of food safety violation lists. And that's not a coincidence or bad luck or statistical noise. Multiple independent studies conducted by universities, consumer advocacy groups, and government agencies have found their chicken has some of the highest rates of bacterial contamination. Among major retailers operating in the United States, we're talking about Salmonella and Campylobacter bacteria that cause severe food poisoning, prolonged hospitalization requiring intravenous fluids and antibiotics, and in rare but real cases, death. Consumer Reports, one of the most respected independent testing organizations in America, has tested chicken from major supermarkets repeatedly over the years, and Walmart's house brand consistently scores among the lowest for safety and quality metrics. But here's what really matters and what should concern every shopper who cares about their family's well-being. These aren't just random findings that happened once or twice and got blown out of proportion by sensationalist media, looking for clicks and views. Year after year, study after study. Regardless of who conducts the testing or which methodology they use, the pattern repeats itself like clockwork. The chicken is often sourced from processing plants with documented safety violations, facilities that have been written up multiple times by federal inspectors but continue operating because the penalties are laughably small compared to their profits. Some of these facilities have been cited dozens, even hundreds of times by USDA inspectors for unsanitary conditions, improper handling procedures, inadequate safety protocols, and failing to maintain required temperatures that prevent bacterial growth. You're essentially gambling with your family's health every single time you purchase their poultry. The problems at Walmart go far beyond just bacteria counts on the meat itself when it's tested in laboratory conditions. There are systemic issues with how the chicken is stored in their massive warehouses, how long it sits in distribution centers before reaching individual stores, and the temperature controls during transport across long distances in trucks that aren't always properly maintained or monitored. Former employees and whistleblowers have come forward, describing conditions that would make your stomach turn if you knew the full details. Chicken sitting at improper temperatures for hours at loading docks, packages that have been resealed after damage or potential contamination, and direct pressure from management to keep expired products on shelves just a little bit longer to avoid taking financial losses on waste that would hurt quarterly earnings reports. This is the ugly reality behind those everyday low prices that draw millions of shoppers through their doors every single day. The company's enormous purchasing power means they can demand rock-bottom prices from suppliers who are desperate for their business, and those suppliers have to cut corners somewhere to make the numbers work and satisfy Walmart's margin requirements. That somewhere is usually safety investments, quality control procedures, and proper animal welfare standards that cost money but don't show up on balance sheets. The chickens sold at Walmart are often raised in the most intensive, cramped conditions imaginable, which breeds disease and requires heavy antibiotic use to keep birds alive long enough to reach market weight, which then contributes to antibiotic resistance that threatens all of us in the long run. What many consumers don't realize is that Walmart's chicken often comes from their own supply chain called Great Value, but the actual processing happens at facilities that also supply other retailers. The differences in the standards and inspection requirements that Walmart demands versus what other retailers require. When you're competing purely on price and nothing else matters to consumers, quality inevitably suffers because there's no competitive advantage to investing in better practices that customers can't see or measure at the point of purchase. Number 2. Albertsons and its massive family of stores. If you shop at Safeway, Vons Pavilions, Jewel-Asco, Shaw's, Acme, Tom Thumb, Randall's United Supermarkets, Market Street, Amigos, Albertsons Market, AHN, Cars, or any of the other numerous banners under the sprawling Albertsons umbrella that operates in nearly every state, you absolutely need to hear this information. Their chicken frequently tests positive for harmful bacteria at rates significantly higher than the industry average, which is already concerning to begin with given how common contamination has become. Food safety advocates and consumer protection organizations have specifically called out their quality control issues as being systemic and institutional rather than isolated incidents that could happen to any retailer dealing with raw poultry. The company has faced multiple lawsuits over and selling chicken past its safe consumption date, with customers becoming seriously ill after consuming products they trusted based on the dates printed clearly on packages. In some cases, employees reported being instructed to relabel chicken with new dates when products were approaching expiration, a practice that's not just unethical but potentially criminal depending on state laws. These aren't rumors or unsubstantiated allegations without concrete evidence. These are documented cases that resulted in legal action, settlements, and in some instances, criminal charges against store managers who were following corporate directives. What makes this situation even worse is the complete opacity of their supply chain practices across all their banner stores. These chains don't make it easy or even possible for average consumers to trace where their chicken actually comes from, which farms raised it, which processing plants handled it, or what the inspection records look like. And that deliberate obscurity is intentional and strategic. The supply chain is kept murky by design, deliberately structured to protect the company from liability and public scrutiny rather than to inform consumers who deserve to know what they're eating and feeding their children. You might see friendly terms like farm fresh or locally sourced on the label, carefully chosen marketing language designed to evoke images of red barns, rolling green pastures, and happy chickens pecking at grain. But that farm could be a massive industrial operation, with a well-documented history of serious violations that you'd never know about unless you spent hours digging through USDA inspection records that aren't exactly designed to be user-friendly or accessible to ordinary people. The deception extends deeply into their labeling practices and marketing campaigns that run on television and in print. Terms like natural, farm-raised, fresh, quality, and premium are thrown around with complete abandon in their advertising, but they're essentially meaningless from a regulatory standpoint because the USDA definitions are so broad as to be useless. A chicken can be labeled natural and still be raised in a windowless warehouse, never seeing a single ray of daylight in its entire short life, packed so tightly with thousands of other birds in stressful conditions that disease spreads rapidly through the population, and fed a diet designed purely for rapid weight gain, rather than health or nutrition or anything resembling what chickens would naturally eat. That's the harsh reality behind the wholesome marketing images of barns and farmers that you see in their advertisements. This company has also been caught using their various brand names to create the illusion of choice, when in reality, you're buying from the exact same supply chain regardless of which banner store you walk into. A customer who stops shopping at Albertsons because of quality concerns might start buying from Safeway instead, not realizing they're owned by the same parent company, use the same distribution centers, and source from the same problematic suppliers. Number 3. Kroger and all its various store names operating across the nation. This company operates under dozens of different banner names across the country, which means their problems aren't confined to one region. They're nationwide and deeply systemic throughout the entire organization. Whether you're shopping at Kroger, Fred Meyer, Ralph's, King Soopers, Fry's, Smith's, QFC, Harris Teeter, Pick and Save, Metro Market, Mariano's, Dillon's, Baker's, Gerb's, JC, Food for Less, Foods, Co., or any of their other brands spanning coast to coast, you're getting chicken from the same compromised supply chain with the same quality control issues and the same corporate priorities. Independent testing conducted by universities and consumer advocacy groups has repeatedly shown elevated levels of contamination in their poultry sections across different states and regions throughout the year. Their private label chicken brands, including Simple Truth, which aggressively markets itself as a healthier, cleaner option worth paying more for, and their conventional store brands that compete on price, have particularly raised red flags among food safety experts, who test these products regularly as part of ongoing monitoring programs. The issue isn't just the presence of bacteria, which is somewhat expected with any raw chicken, and why proper cooking to internal temperatures of 165 degrees Fahrenheit is absolutely essential. It's the levels of contamination found during testing and the types of dangerous bacteria being discovered in their products. Antibiotic-resistant strains are showing up with alarming and increasing frequency in samples from Kroger stores. These are bacteria that have evolved to survive our best medicines, making infections extremely difficult and sometimes impossible to treat effectively with standard protocols. When someone gets food poisoning from antibiotic-resistant bacteria, standard treatments don't work as expected. Hospital stays become longer, far more expensive, and significantly more dangerous with higher mortality rates. People have died from infections that would have been easily treatable a generation ago before antibiotic resistance became such a widespread problem. Kroger's quality issues extend beyond the source farms to how they handle chicken. In their stores every single day across thousands of locations, undercover investigations and surprise spot checks by health departments have found improper storage temperatures in refrigerated cases, cross-contamination between raw poultry and ready-to-eat foods in deli sections and prepared food areas, and inadequate employee training on basic food safety protocols that should be standard in any grocery operation. When profit margins are tight and shareholders demand quarterly growth and increasing dividends, training programs and proper procedures are often the first things to get cut from operational budgets. Employees are pressured to work faster, stock more product in less time, and spend less time on things like properly sanitizing surfaces or carefully checking and recording temperatures throughout their shifts. The company's merger with Albertsons, which is currently being reviewed by regulators, would create an even larger entity with even less incentive to compete on quality and safety. When a handful of companies control the entire market, consumers have fewer options and less leverage to demand better standards. Number 4. Target the upscale image, hiding serious problems. This might genuinely surprise some people because Target has carefully cultivated an image of being slightly more upscale, cleaner, more trustworthy, and more responsible than discount competitors like Walmart. But their aggressive grocery expansion over the past decade has come with serious quality control issues that haven't received nearly enough media attention or consumer awareness considering how many people shop there. Their chicken often comes from the exact same problematic suppliers as other budget retailers, but they're charging premium prices based purely on their brand image and store aesthetics rather than any actual quality differences in the products themselves. Multiple consumer advocacy groups have documented numerous cases of chicken sold at Target testing positive for antibiotic-resistant bacteria and dangerous pathogens at rates comparable to or even higher than discount retailers. What's particularly frustrating and almost offensive about Target is that customers are paying significantly more expecting meaningfully better quality based on the store's carefully crafted image, but they're simply not getting what they're paying for or what they reasonably expect. The company invested billions of dollars in expanding their grocery offerings and remodeling stores to include larger food sections with attractive displays, but they didn't invest equally in the infrastructure, supply chain management, and rigorous quality control needed to do it safely and responsibly. Distribution centers that weren't originally designed for perishable foods are now handling them without adequate modifications. Staff members who weren't trained in food safety protocols are now responsible for them without proper supervision or ongoing education. The result is predictable and has been disastrous for consumers who trusted the brand. Target has also been caught up in several major recalls that they were unconscionably slow to communicate to customers who had purchased the affected products. Products remained on shelves for days after recall notices were officially issued by regulatory agencies. Signage was inadequate, poorly placed, or non-existent in many stores. Customers who had already purchased affected items weren't properly notified through their loyalty programs despite having the technology and customer contact information to do so. This isn't just incompetence or bureaucratic slowness, it's a deliberate corporate calculation that the cost of perfect compliance and aggressive recall responses exceeds the cost of occasional lawsuits and temporary bad publicity that blows over after a news cycle or two. Number 5. Aldi. When discount prices mean discount safety, this German discount chain has absolutely exploded in popularity across America over the past 15 years. attracting budget-conscious customers with rock-bottom prices that seem too good to be true. And there's a reason for that, because they often are too good to be true when you dig into what those prices actually mean. Those incredibly low prices come with significant and dangerous trade-offs that most shoppers don't realize or think about when they're comparing price tags. Their chicken sourcing is deeply problematic, with frequent recalls and contamination issues that have become almost routine if you're paying attention to food safety news. Because they operate on such incredibly tight margins with minimal staff and bare-bones operations designed to maximize efficiency, the quality control simply isn't there at the level it needs to be. Every single dollar spent on better sourcing or more rigorous testing is a dollar that can't be passed on as savings to price-sensitive customers who choose Aldi specifically. Because of low prices, Aldi has had multiple serious recalls for potential salmonella contamination, listeria concerns, and undeclared allergens in processed chicken products that put consumers with allergies at serious risk. Their response times to safety issues have been publicly criticized by regulatory agencies as too slow and inadequate, putting consumers at unnecessary risk even after problems are identified by health departments or through customer complaints. The company's entire business model of extreme efficiency and minimal overhead doesn't leave much room for the redundant safety systems and double checks that prevent contaminated food from reaching consumers in the first place. The recall system's fatal flaws. What should really concern you about all of these retailers is understanding how the recall process actually works in practice, versus how most people think it works based on news coverage of major incidents. When contaminated chicken is discovered, either through routine testing or because people start getting sick and patterns emerge, the system relies heavily on consumers happening to see the news and voluntarily returning products they've purchased. But the reality is that most people never hear about these recalls, unless they're actively looking for food safety alerts or the outbreak is severe enough to make national news with multiple hospitalizations or deaths. The chicken gets eaten, people get sick with symptoms they attribute to a stomach bug or food poisoning from unknown sources, and unless it's severe enough to require hospitalization, where doctors specifically test for foodborne pathogens and report results to health departments, it gets written off as a mystery illness. The true scale of the problem is vastly underreported and underestimated by both public health officials and consumers. The Centers for Disease Control estimates that only a tiny fraction of foodborne illnesses are ever officially reported and traced back to their source through epidemiological investigation. For every outbreak that makes the news with dozens or hundreds of confirmed cases, there are literally countless individual cases that never get connected to the contaminated product that caused them, because people don't seek medical care or doctors don't test for specific pathogens. This creates a false sense of security among consumers. The system appears to be working because we only hear about the most severe outbreaks that affect large numbers of people in concentrated areas, but the reality is that low-level contamination causing individual illnesses happens constantly across the country every single day. Your alternatives and action steps. So what are your alternatives if you can't trust these major chains with your family's health and safety? Local butchers and smaller regional chains typically have much better sourcing and more rigorous quality control because their reputations depend on it directly and they can't afford major scandals. They often know exactly which farms their chicken comes from, can trace any issues immediately, and have personal relationships with suppliers that create accountability. Your health is worth more than saving a few dollars on dangerous chicken that could land you in the hospital. Make the switch today, because every meal matters and every choice you make sends a message to these corporations about what standards you'll accept.